Welcome to Dad's Revenge, where quiet men prove that patience is a strength. Each story here is about a father who is underestimated, disrespected, or betrayed by the very people who should be protecting him, and how that father finds his own way to mend things. Welcome to today's story. The Landmark Inn has a ballroom on the second floor with windows facing north out over Lake Superior. That February, the ice ran about 400 yards out before it broke into black water. I know because I counted the tables between me and the glass while the plates were cleared. 18 tables, 180 people. My granddaughter had done the seating chart herself back in November, and she had put me at table 2. Her name is Haley. She was 24 that night, and she had my wife's hands. The groom was a young electrician named J.C. Oliver, 3 years in the trade. He shook my hand at the church like he meant it, and never once called me sir, which I appreciated more than I said. There was a 4-piece band from Escanaba and a cash bar my son-in-law had turned into an open bar an hour before anybody noticed. At 8 o'clock, my son-in-law stood up with a glass in his hand. Rhett Nash is a good speaker. He thanked the church, the caterer, the landmark by name. Then he went to the back tables and named the wives of 3 of my pitmen, Dolores and Beth Ann and Kate, and asked the room to give them a hand. The room did. It was a decent thing to do. I noticed that in 6 years he had never once sat down at that table. Then he said this. He said the company we all worked for was built by hands that knew when to let go. Everybody clapped. It sounded like a compliment. Like something you say about a man who retires with dignity. I sat there with my fork in my hand and turned that sentence over twice the way you turn a bolt you are not sure is threaded right, and then the band came back in and I let it go. He had one more thing. He announced that Haley and Jason had decided to stay in Marquette County instead of taking the Milwaukee offer. He said it the way a man announces a merger. The room came apart. Haley put her face in her hands. I clapped too. 45 years in this county, and I did not ask that girl one single question about what she was going to do up here for work. My daughter stood by the side door. Janelle had been there most of the night, not sitting, standing with her back near that door and a glass of ice water she never refilled. She had not taken a drink all evening, and I know because I was watching. Her mother used to do the same thing at weddings, stand at the edge of a room and hold something so her hands had a job. I filed it under nerves, mother of the bride. That is what I told myself. At 8:40, the band stopped for the dances. There was a printed program at every table. Cream cardstock gold letters. Third item down, bride and grandfather. Haley picked the song in October and made me learn it. I had been practicing in the shed for 3 weeks with the space heater going. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, holding the handle of the drill press like it was a girl. I stood up and squared my tie. My hand went into my jacket and touched a 25-foot tape measure I had carried since morning. I could not have told you why. I had put on a suit and I had brought a tape. Haley turned around at the head table to look for me. Janelle came across the floor and stopped in front of me. She had a black contractor bag in both hands, the heavy kind, 30-gallon, and she pushed it into my chest hard enough that I had to take it or wear it. It was heavier than clothes have any business being. Through the gap at the top, I could see one of my own work gloves, the left one, palm up. She said it loud, not screaming, loud the way you talk on a job site so the man in the far end of the beam can hear you. Take your things and don't come back. I want to tell you what a room does. The table nearest us went quiet first, and it moved outward from there like something dropped in water. A woman at table 5 said, "Oh," in a small voice. A man I have known since 1991 looked at the ceiling. The band leader laid his hand flat across his strings. Haley was still turned around in her chair, her mouth partly open, her veil over one shoulder. A chair leg barked against the floor, and a kid in a hotel vest, 19 maybe, walked to the side door and opened it because my daughter had already looked at him and he had already understood. The cold came in across that floor like water out of a broken line. I went out, 8 steps down the outside stair iron salted, and I counted them the way I count everything. 22 below, no wind, which up here is the kind of cold that does not announce itself. it just starts taking. I had a suit on. I had a bag in my arms. The door shut behind me, and the music got cut in half. The low end came through the wall, and the rest of it stayed inside, and that is how I knew the band had started our song. I stood in that parking lot and let it play all the way through. I did not argue with her. People have asked me about that since. I did not say one word to my own daughter while she put me out of my granddaughter's wedding, and the reason is that in the half second before she pushed that bag into me, I looked at her face. There was something in it. I did not have a name for it. The kid came out after me. I was 40 feet from the door, still holding that bag, when I heard the stairs ring behind me. Jason Oliver came down them in his shirt sleeves with his own coat over his forearm. 22 below, and he had come out in a rented tuxedo vest. He put the coat in my free hand. I started to explain something. I do not remember what I had lined up to say. He shook his head. He said, "It's cold, Mr. Robbins." Then he went back up the stairs, and the door shut. And that was the last kindness anybody did me for 4 days. It is 3.2 miles from the Landmark Inn to the truck stop on US 41. I have driven that stretch since I was 19. I had never walked it. My truck was not in the lot. I looked. I walked both rows twice before I started down the hill, and I told myself it had been towed for the plows. Salt trucks came by with their beacons going, and each one threw brine across the shoulder, and after the second one, my dress shoes were done. There is a specific feeling to a leather sole giving up. It goes soft, then cold. Then it stops being a shoe. I will tell you about the company because you need it, and because I needed something to think about besides my feet. I bought my first air-track drill in 1979, financed at 11% with a 90-day stripping contract to pay for it. That was all I had. One machine and 90 days. My wife did the invoices at the kitchen table with a calculator that had a paper tape, and when the tape ran out, she wrote the figures in the margin in pencil. By 1985, we had a crusher. By 1990, we had the dolomite pit at Palmer. Flux stone, high calcium, low silica, the kind that goes to the pellet plants for the iron. It is not glamorous work. It is a hole in the ground and a screening plant and 60 people, and the siren still goes off at 3 for shift change, even though half the mines it was built for are shut. 60 people. I could give you all 60 names right now and tell you which of them has a bad back. Then there is March of 1987. The big mine cut a shift that spring, and it came down the line to us, and on the 6th of March, I laid off 22 men. I did it myself. I stood at the door of the change house with the envelopes in my hand and gave each man his own, and I looked each one of them in the face. I had practiced something to say. I worked on it in the truck. Something about how it was not about them, about how I would call them first when it turned around. I did not say one word, not to a single one of them. 22 men and my mouth would not open, and they took their envelopes and walked out past me into the parking lot, and some of them said thanks, which I have never gotten over. A mile and a half in, with my hands going numb, I did a stupid thing. I pulled out my phone and called my own office. I have known that number for 30 years. I dialed it before I thought about it, the way you reach for a light switch in a house you used to live in. It rang twice. "Thank you for calling Superior Aggregate Group." I stopped in the middle of the shoulder and listened all the way to the menu options. Then I called again because I thought I had misheard it, and I had not. I built that company. I named it after my own family. I had never heard those 3 words strung together in my life. The truck stop had one of those tall canopy lights over the pumps, the kind that makes everybody look like they are already dead. I stood under it because it was the only place out of the wind, set the bag down between my feet, and took out my wallet. $61, 2 20s, a 10, 2 5s, a 1. I have not carried much cash since the 80s. It never mattered. There was a card for the company and a card for the house, and both worked every day of my life. The debit card came back declined. Not insufficient funds, declined. I ran it twice at the pump, then went inside and had the woman behind the counter run it, and she turned the screen around so I could read it. It said the account was restricted. I called the bank's after-hours line. A recording told me to visit a branch during business hours. It was 9:40 on a Saturday. Then I called the towing outfit that pulls for the landmark because I still believe the plow story, and a man who sounded like he was eating looked it up for me. It had not been towed. It had been repossessed by the registered owner, which was the company, and the driver had signed it out of that lot at 4 o'clock that afternoon. 4 o'clock. The ceremony was at 5. The reception did not start until 6:30. My daughter did not hand me that bag until 20 of 9. I stood under that light with my wallet still open and did the arithmetic, and it said somebody had known at 4 in the afternoon that I would not be driving home for my granddaughter's wedding. I picked the bag back up. I could have left it there, a garbage bag full of my own clothes and my own gloves sitting in the slush at a truck stop, and every part of me that had pride left wanted to walk away from it. But setting it down for good meant agreeing with what it was, so I carried it another 2 miles. The Northwoods Motel sits where the county road comes off US 41, 12 units in a row, with a sign that has said vacancy since 1974, because the C burned out and nobody fixed it. $54 a night. I put it on the counter in 1s and 5s, and the man counted it twice, not because he doubted me, but because that is what you do with small bills. Room 12 at the end, by the propane tank. That left me $7. There is a dumpster behind the units, and I walked out there with the bag before I ever put the key in the door. I want to be honest about this part because it matters. I did not go out there to look through anything. I went to throw it away. My daughter had put my life in a contracted bag in front of 180 people, and there is a thing that happens to a man-handed garbage in public. You start to believe the container. You think, well, if that is what it is, let it be that, and let me be the man who did not flinch. I got it up on the lip of the dumpster. I had it about 1/3 of the way over. Then I stood there in the dark with my hands on it. The wall heater in room 12 puts out about as much as a man breathing on you. I had a borrowed coat and a suit and dress shoes that had died on the highway. If there was a flannel in that bag, I needed the flannel. That is all. It was not curiosity and it was not sentiment. My feet were wet and it was 24 below, and pride is a thing you can afford at room temperature. I brought it inside and I set it on the bed and I untied the knot. The first thing out was my left work glove, the one I had seen through the gap. Then the right one laid on top of it, palm to palm. I sat on the edge of that mattress and looked at those gloves a while. Somebody had put them in there on purpose. You do not throw a man's gloves in with his clothes. Gloves live in a truck or on a bench. Somebody had gone out to the shed for those and laid them on top so they would be the first thing a hand found. 3 flannels under that, Carhartt double fronts, wool socks 6 pair rolled, and the photograph in a frame face down. Our wedding picture from 1974, me in a borrowed jacket outside the church in the Gawney, Camille with her hair up, both of us squinting into the sun. The flannel on top smelled like the cedar chest at the end of our bed. I did not say anything about that. Not out loud, not to myself. Because if you notice that a shirt has been folded a certain way, you have to admit you know whose hands folded it, and then you have to sit with what that means. I set the picture on the nightstand face up and kept going. Under the socks, the bag got heavy in a way clothes do not get heavy. Hard corners. I moved the last shirt off it and there was a Christmas cookie tin, the round kind, with the snowy village on the lid, taped shut. Not one strip, 4 wraps of gray duct tape all the way around, the way you tape something you do not want opened by accident. My wife bought that tin in about 1998. I got my pocket knife and cut the tape and set the lid on the bed. Money. Not bank straps. Rubber bands around bundles of mixed bills, 20s and 50s and 100s, some old enough to be the small portrait kind. 16 bundles. I counted the first one twice and got $3,800, then counted them all and got a little over $62,000. I have never in my life had more than $400 in cash in a room with me. Under the money there was a passbook. The little booklet kind with ledger lines from a bank in Green Bay, Wisconsin, 4 hours south. The name on it was Abram J. Robbins. I have never had an account in Wisconsin. The last posted line was 2 months before my wife died. $348,000 and change. Under the passbook, there was a stack of paper about 2 inches thick, held with a butterfly clip. Land contracts, 19 of them. Seller financing on houses in Palmer and Negaunee and Ishpeming, the kind of deal a man makes when the bank will not touch him. The earliest was dated 1993. The whole stack, when I got out a pen and worked it, came to about $790,000 still owed. 62, 348, 790. I added it 3 times. I got the same answer 3 times. A woman who paid our bills with a calculator that ran out of tape had, without one word to me, built up $1.2 million. There was a school notebook in there too, graph paper, the cheap kind. It had slid out with the contracts, and I put it aside on the bedspread without opening it because I thought it was a grocery book. That is exactly what I thought, grocery book. I want to tell you what I did next, and it is not what you would expect. I did not cry. I did not call anybody. I did not put the money in my hands to feel it. I took the tape measure out of my jacket, thumbed it open, and measured the thickness of that stack of contracts. 2 1/8 inches. I wrote it on my palm with the pen. Then I sat and looked at the number because measuring is the only thing my hands have ever known how to do when the rest of me cannot. And down in the bottom of that tin, under where the contracts had been, there was one more thing I had not touched yet. It was a sheet of graph paper folded in 4, worn soft along the creases, the way paper gets when it has been opened more than once. Pencil. Number 2, sharpened dull. My wife never used a pen for anything that mattered. She used to say, ink is for people who have decided they will never be wrong. I knew the handwriting before I read a word of it. You live with somebody for 49 years, you know their hand the way you know their step on the stairs. The first line said this: "Don't open this while you still have something left to hold on to." I read that 8 or 9 times. I turned the paper over. There was nothing on the back. Then the rest of it. And it was short. My wife was not a long writer. She said the money was mine and always had been. She said she started in 1993 and had not asked me because she already knew what I would say. She said the tin was in the cedar chest under the extra blankets and that our daughter knew where it was and had known for 3 years. She said she had left Janelle one condition. That was the word she used. Condition. Underlined once. Then she wrote that she was sorry about the condition, that she hoped I would understand it when it came, and that if I did not, I should remember she had thought about it a long time. She did not say what it was. She signed it with her first initial, the way she signed the grocery list. I sat there with that paper in my hand, in a motel room that smelled like propane and carpet shampoo, and I want to tell you what went through me in order, because the order is the part that shames me. First was the money. $62,000 on a bedspread. A man's whole idea of himself moves when that much cash is in the room with him. Second was gratitude, and it came on hard. My wife, who I put in the ground 3 years ago in February, had reached out of that ground and put a hand under me on the worst night of my life. Third was the one I did not want. She knew. Not guessed, not worried. She sat at our kitchen table in 1993, 30 years before any of this, and she looked down the road and she saw a night where her husband would have nothing left, and she started putting money aside for it. She built a second life out of other people's mortgage payments in pencil, and she did not tell me. You do not prepare for a thing you think might not happen. You prepare for a thing you have decided is coming, which means my wife knew I was going to let it happen. She knew what I was. And she planned around me the way you plan around a bad hill on a haul road. There was one more item in that tin. A manila envelope folded once to fit the round bottom, and inside it, a document with a county recorder's stamp in the corner and a raised notary seal you could feel with your thumb. Camille W. Robbins, Mineral Trust, established May 1994. I read it 3 times. I understood almost none of it. I have been in the aggregate business since I was 19. I can look at a face of rock and tell you within a truckload what will come off it. I can hear a bearing going out on a cone crusher from the office, but a trust document is written in a language built so a man like me will hand it to somebody else. I read the same paragraph 4 times and could not have told you what it did. I got the word grantor, I got the word successor, I got Palmer, and I got a legal description with a township and range in it that I recognized as my own pit because I have read that description on 100 permits. and in the margin, low in pencil, in my wife's hand, a name. A phone number with a 906 area code and a Big Bay exchange. No note about who it was, just a name and 7 digits written sideways up the edge of a legal document, the way you write while you were on the phone. Here is what I did with all of that. I did not cry. I know what you would expect from an old man alone in a motel at 1 in the morning with his dead wife's handwriting in his hands. I did not call anybody. I did not go back through the money. I stood up. I took the tape out of my coat and I measured the door frame of room 12 at the Northwoods Motel. 79 3/4 by 31 1/2. Undersized. Somebody had framed that opening for a 32-inch door and then hung a 30 in it, probably after a kick-in, and never redid the jamb. I wrote the numbers on my palm under the other numbers. Then I sat down in the chair by the window with the note in one hand and the trust in the other, and I did not move again until the light came up gray over the tree line and the plow went by on 41 at about 6:45. I have thought about that night a lot since. Camille loved me enough to build me a raft 30 years before the water came, and she understood me well enough to know I would not reach for it until I was already under. I still do not know which one of those hurts worse. I called the number at 7:10 on Sunday morning. That is the one call I made. People ask me about the whole week, all 6 days, and the answer is that I made exactly one phone call in it, and it lasted 3 seconds. A woman picked up. Not hello. She said her last name Barnes the way people did when a phone was screwed to a wall. I said I was Abram Robbins, and I had a document with her number written on it in my late wife's handwriting. The line went quiet for about 1.5 seconds. Then she hung up. I sat and looked at the phone in my hand. Then I put the tin in the bag with my clothes checked out of room 12 and paid a man $39 a day for a Chevy with 190,000 miles on it and a heater that only worked on high. Big Bay is 28 miles north of Marquette on County Road 550, and in February, that road is a tunnel. Snowbanks past the mirrors, jack pine leaning in over the top. You come out of it, and the lake is just there, white for 200 yards, and then black. Her place was a 1-story off the road with smoke coming out of it and 2 dogs in the yard that did not bark, which told me more about her than anything else that day. She opened the door before I got up the steps, 70 or so, reading glasses pushed up in her hair. She looked at my suit, which I was still wearing because it was the only thing in that bag that was not a work shirt, and at the folder under my arm. She said, "I've been retired 11 years. Then she closed the door. I want to tell you about the next 40 minutes because they are the worst 40 minutes in this whole story, and there is no money in them and nobody yells. I went back to that rented Chevy and I sat in it and I did not start the engine. I am not a man who asks. In 1981, I ran 140 miles on a bad hip rather than ask my brother-in-law to cover a haul, and Camille found out 2 years later from somebody else. When she was sick, I did not ask one person in this county for one thing. I do not know where that comes from. I know what it costs. 40 minutes. The windows fogged. The dogs came over and sat by the front tire and looked at me. Then I got out and knocked again. She opened it, and she did not say anything. And I stood on that porch in a wedding suit and told a woman I had never met that my daughter had put a garbage bag in my hands in front of 180 people at my granddaughter's wedding, that a hotel kid had opened the side door because she had already looked at him, that I had walked 3 miles in dress shoes, and that I had gone out to a dumpster to throw the bag away and opened it instead because I was cold. I did not tell it well. I told it out of order. She stepped back from the doorway, which is not the same as inviting a man in, and I went in anyway. Her kitchen had a table, a wood stove, and a laptop in the corner with a dish towel over it. She poured coffee out of a green thermos into a mug and drank it. She did not offer me any. It was not rudeness, it was just the way she was. The way some people do not shake hands. She saw me looking at the corner, and she pointed at the towel with 2 fingers. She said, "That gets used for the weather and my sister. I don't go into anybody's systems, I don't go into anybody's email, and I don't want to hear about anybody's password. Everything I was ever good at is on paper in a building somewhere. If what you need is on a computer, you're at the wrong house." Then she put her glasses down on her nose and put her hand out for the folder. Sloan Barnes read that trust document for 4 minutes and did not say one word. I have watched men read blueprints my whole life. There is a thing the face does when a page stops being paper and starts being a place. She did that. Halfway through, she said something I did not understand at the time. She said, "In 1996, I signed off on a claim I shouldn't have. Man was hiding something, I could not find it, and I let it close." She turned a page. People don't hide money. Money wants to be found. What people hide is obligations. I said I did not follow. She said, "You will." Then she got to the back of the document, the part with the property description, and she went still. She read that page twice. She took her glasses off, and she asked me a question. She said, "Mr. Robbins, whose name is on the mining permit?" I opened my mouth. 45 years. I have signed my name to bonds, leases, haul agreements, reclamation plans, a purchase order for every bearing that ever went into that plant. I have a filing cabinet in a trailer at Palmer with my whole life in it, alphabetical. And I sat in a stranger's kitchen in Big Bay, Michigan, and I could not tell her whose name was on my own permit. She looked at me over the top of the glasses for a while. Then she got up and took her coat off the hook. The Register of Deeds for Marquette County opens at 8:30. We were there at 8:20. Sloan knew the woman behind the counter by name, and the woman knew her, and they did not do any catching up. Sloan put the legal description on the counter and said a book and page number out loud like she was ordering parts. It took 11 minutes. The original was there. Recorded May of 1994, ink stamp in the corner, a clerk's initials in a hand nobody writes in anymore. Camille W. Robbins Mineral Trust. And what it held was the mineral estate under the Palmer Pit, the rock itself, purchased in her own name with her own money and leased to my company on a 40-year term. I stood at that counter with my hat in my hand. I have taken stone out of that ground for 34 years. Every dollar this family has ever had came up out of that hole. And it turns out the ground was never ours. It was hers, and we rented it, and I signed the lease myself in 1994 in a stack of about 40 other things. Sloan read the lease clause twice and said, "Huh," which was the loudest thing she said all morning. Then we drove to the state office. Eagle has a regional building off 3rd Street with fluorescent lights and a counter with a glass partition and a dot matrix printer behind it that they still use because it does carbon copies. The man who came to the glass was about 61, cardigan, reading glasses on a cord. Dexter Huffman. 30-some years with the department, 1 year out from retirement, and the kind of careful you only get from a man who has watched other people sign the wrong thing. He typed 3 keys and turned the monitor a little bit so I could see it. He said, "You're Abram Robbins." I said I was. He said, "Well, according to the state of Michigan, you're still running that pit." I said that could not be right, and he did the thing that I came to understand is just how the man is built. He did not argue with me. He read me the citation number of the rule first out loud, digit by digit, and then he told me what the rule did. Here is what came out of that counter over the next half hour. A mining permit in Michigan is issued to an operator, not to a company name on a sign, not to a shareholder, not to whoever is answering the phone, to a named operator of record, a person who is on the hook for the site. Every reclamation bond hangs off that name. My permit was issued to Abram J. Robbins in 1990, and it had been renewed under that name every cycle since. When Rhett reorganized the company, he moved the shares. 70% full operating control, new name on the sign, new name on the phone, all of that transferred because shares transfer. The permit did not, because a permit is not property. You do not sell a permit. You file an application to transfer it to a new operator, and that application requires the outgoing operator's notarized written consent and a new reclamation bond posted by the incoming one. Dexter went into the file and said the application had never been filed. Not denied. Not pending. Never filed in 2.5 years. He kept going down the record and stopped for about half a second on a line near the bottom, and his mouth moved a little the way a man's does when he reads something that is not his job. He said, "There's a cross-reference on the bond. That's the surety's business, not mine," and he went on to the next screen. I did not ask. I wish I had asked. Sloan asked him one more thing before we left. She asked when a transfer application could be filed. Dexter read her the citation number digit by digit and then said, "Any business day. They're processed in order of receipt." At the time, that was the most boring sentence I heard all week. Out in the hallway, Sloan sat down on one of those plastic chairs and made me sit down too, and she explained it to me in about a minute, and she only did it once. She never explained it again the whole rest of the way, and I never needed her to. She said, "Listen to me. Your son-in-law owns 70% of a company. Fine. That company has no permit to dig and no ground to stand on. The rock underneath it belongs to a trust your wife set up in 1994, and the legal right to operate that pit belongs to a man, not a business, and that man is sitting on this chair. Every morning that plant runs, it runs because your name is on a piece of paper in a drawer in this building." I want to tell you the honest thing. I did not get it the first time. She had to say the last part again. Because for 45 years, I thought what I had built was a pit. Trucks, plant scales, 60 men. I thought if a man took that away from me, he had it, and I had nothing, and that is the whole of it. And what she was telling me sitting on a plastic chair under a fluorescent light in a state building was that I had been wrong about what the thing even was. The thing was my name. It always had been. It was the only part of it he could not buy, could not sign for, could not put on a sign out front. She stood up and put her coat on and looked down at me. She said, "You don't need to take the company back, Mr. Robbins." She said, "You just need to take your name off it." We were halfway down the hall when Dexter Huffman came out from behind the counter and called after us. He had a folder in his hand, and he did not look happy to be holding it. He said, "Mr. Robbins, before you go do whatever it is you're going to go do." Then he read me a citation number digit by digit the way he does. And then he told me what it meant. If the operator of record files to withdraw, the site has to cease operations within 24 hours of the effective date. Not wind down, cease. No extraction, no crushing, no loadout. He said there is no hardship extension in the rule, there is no grace period, and there is no version of it where a plant keeps running while the paperwork sorts itself out. I sat down on a plastic chair in that hallway. I did not decide to. My legs did it. He stood there a second, and then he added one more thing in the flat way a man mentions something he assumes you already know. He said there was an open contract on the file, an overburdened job on the Presque Isle ore dock approach, and that anything unfinished on a site tends to get complicated when the operator changes. He said it like a footnote. I filed it like a footnote. Then he went back behind his glass. Sloan drove. I did not ask her to. She just took the keys out of my hand in the lot and got in the driver's side, and we went out to Ishpeming and got a booth at Ralph's, which has been making pasties in the same building since before I was born. I ordered one and did not eat it. 60. Here is what I did in that booth. I ran the number. 60 on the payroll. 9 of them run the plant, 11 in the pit, drivers, mechanics, scale house, lab, front office. Palmer has under 400 people in it. Take 60 checks out of a place that size and you are not taking 60. You are taking the gas station on the corner and the shift trade at the bar and the bay at the auto shop where our trucks go, and you are taking the school aide who is somebody's wife. And I want to be honest with you about how I did that arithmetic. I did it the way I do a stripping bid. Cubic yards, haul distance, cycle time. I made it a quantity. I did not put one single face to it, not one name, and I know all 60, and I could have named every one of them sitting in that booth with a cold pasty in front of me, and I chose not to. I counted them like tons. My phone rang at about 1 o'clock, and it was Leon Lamb. Leon has been my pit foreman for 30 years. He came on at 28 with a bad transmission in his truck and 2 kids. There is a whole thing between me and Leon that neither one of us has ever said out loud from a winter his wife was sick, and it is going to stay that way. He was calling from the plant. I could hear the crusher behind him, that low grinding you can pick out from a quarter mile. He said payroll was 3 days late this week, and did I know anything about it? He did not know about the wedding. That is the part that got me. 2.5 days and it had not made it out to Palmer yet. Or it had and nobody wanted to be the one to say it to him. He asked me if everything was all right, and I said the thing you say. I said it was probably the bank that these things happen with, a payroll service, that I would look into it. Then I asked him about the west face and whether the water was coming in the way it did last spring. He talked about the west face for about 90 seconds because Leon will talk about the west face anytime you let him, and then I told him I had another call and I hung up on him. I have hung up on that man exactly once in 30 years. There were 2 fellows in the next booth, younger than me by a lot older than my daughter. Work boots, the good kind, and I could tell by the way one of them was sitting that his back was gone. I did not know them. They did not know me. One of them was talking about a truck. He had put money down on a truck, a used one, and he was going through the payments out loud the way you do when you are still trying to talk yourself into it. 400 and change a month for 60 months. The other one said something about how the flux tonnage looked good this quarter and they would probably be all right. I sat in that booth and listened to 2 men I have never met plan on a number that I had it in my power to erase by Friday. I paid for their coffee on the way out. I did not tell the girl why, and I did not look over at them. Then I stood in the lot at Ralph's in that wind, and there is a green sign at the corner there that says Palmer 6. 45 years, and here is where I had gotten to. I had one weapon, and it was a charge set under the feet of my own people. It gets dark up here at 4:30 in February. We were back at her kitchen table by 3, and the lights were on by the time we finished. I had $1.2 million, and I could not have bought a cup of coffee with it. That is not a figure of speech. That is the arithmetic, and Sloan made me write it out on the back of a feed store calendar because she said a man does not believe a number until he has made it himself. Here is what she explained to me, and like the other thing, she only explained it once. To take my name off that permit and put it back on clean under me, I would need a reclamation bond. $2.1 million on that site. A surety writes it, the state holds it, and it is there so that if the operator walks away, the state has the money to close the hole and put the ground back. Nobody writes $2.1 million for a 74-year-old man with no company behind him on a rush without collateral. They would want 50% in cash in an account with their name on it. $1,050,000, plus a lawyer, plus the emergency filing fees. Then the other half of it, $62,000 in a cookie tin. That was the only money I actually had, that was it. $348,000 in Green Bay in a passbook account from 1994, and passbook accounts do not have an app. Sloan called at 2 o'clock, and a woman down there said the account holder would need to appear at a branch with photo identification. 4 hours south, 4 hours back. And $790,000 in 19 land contracts, which is real money, and also not money at all. It is 19 families in Palmer and Negaunee and Ishpeming making a payment on the 1st. You cannot spend that on a Wednesday. You can sell the paper at a discount, and they will take 30 or 40 cents on the dollar, and 3 weeks doing it. I did the subtraction on the back of that calendar. 1.2 million in, 1,090,000 out, near enough. I would come out the other side of this with about $110,000 at 74 years old, and a hole in the ground. I sat with that for a while. I did not say anything about it out loud because saying a number out loud makes it a thing you are afraid of. Then Sloan got up and made a phone call, and this is where it turned. She did not use a computer. She never did the whole way through. She called a woman she has known since 1988 in the file room of the surety that wrote my bonds, a basement in Lansing, where they still keep originals on paper because a bond is a signed instrument and the signed one is the one that counts. She asked for the bond file on the Palmer permit, everything in it, every endorsement, every rider. Then we waited 2 hours. Up to that point, I was a man with a problem I could see the shape of. It was hard and it was expensive, and it was going to cost me my people, but I could see it. The fax machine in her back room started up a little before 6. She stood there and read the pages as they came out, and she did not hand them to me. She read the whole thing standing up. Then she read one page again. Then she said, "Sit down." I was already sitting down. 18 months ago, Rhett Nash pledged my reclamation bond as collateral. I did not know what that meant when she said it, and I made her say it 3 different ways before it got in. Here is what it means. There is a private lender out of Green Bay, Wisconsin, that had written him a bridge loan, short money, hard money, the kind you take when a bank has stopped returning your calls. To secure it, he assigned an interest in the bond instrument on the Palmer site. That bond has my name on it, not the company's, mine. It was written to Abram J. Robbins as operator because that is the only way it can be written, which means my son-in-law borrowed against my personal obligation. And it means this: if I pull my name and that pit goes dark and nobody steps in, the site is an abandoned operation. The state calls the bond, the surety pays $2.1 million to close and reclaim that ground, and then the surety comes after the man on the instrument. That is me. I would not just lose the mine. I would owe $2.1 million for a hole I do not own on ground my wife bought in 1994. Sloan laid the page on the table and put her finger on the endorsement line. She said, "In 1996, I told you what people hide." I sat in a kitchen in Big Bay with the lake going dark out the window, and one of her dogs got up and lay down against my boot, and neither one of us said anything for a while. The stove ticked. The other dog slept. Sloan looked up the bid calendar before I left. Bids on the 5-year Fluxstone supply contract close Wednesday at 10 in the morning. The public opening is Friday at 9. It was 4 o'clock Monday afternoon. I had been carrying that permit around in my head for 2 days, like it was a lever. It was not a lever. It was a grenade with the pin out, and my name was the handle. I left Big Bay at 5:30 Tuesday morning and drove 4 hours south to go get my wife's money. US 41 down through Escanaba and Menominee and across into Wisconsin. The lake is on your left the whole way, and then it is gone. Salt haze on the windshield. That Chevy's heater on high the entire trip because it had no other setting. I want to tell you something I am not proud of. Somewhere south of Marinette, I felt lighter. Nobody down there knew me. Nobody at a gas pump in Peshtigo was going to look at me and think that is the fellow who got walked out of the Landmark on Saturday. For about an hour, I was just an old man in a rented car, and it was the best I had felt in 3 days, and then I understood what I was feeling, and it made me sick. I felt better because I was out of the county where my people were. The branch in Green Bay was in a strip on the west side. Green carpet. A clock on the wall behind the desks. The girl who helped me was maybe 30. She had never seen a passbook before. She had to go get somebody older, and that woman brought the ledger card up on a microfilm reader in the back, and then she came out with the card and set it next to my driver's license. There was a signature specimen on that card from 2011. She looked at the card. She looked at the slip I had just signed. Then she said, and she meant it as a nice thing, "Well, that hasn't changed a bit in 13 years. I said, "No, ma'am, it has not. I have signed my name the same way since I was 22. There is a reason for it, and it is not character. In 1972, a bit walked on me on an air track, and the joint in my right thumb never came all the way back. My A does not close. It comes up, it stops, and I lift the pen every single time because my hand will not carry it through."
You could not fake that. You would have to know why it looks like that.
I sat in that chair for 11 minutes while they wired $348,000 into a new account in my name. The older woman asked what it was for. Not nosy, just a person at a desk making conversation with an old man at 11 in the morning. I said, "I'm buying my name back." She smiled the way you smile at something you did not follow and told me to have a nice day. I went and got lunch on Main Street because I had been driving since 5:30 and my back was locked up. Busy little place, lunch rush tables close together. 2 tables over there was a man in a gray suit, mid-50s, eating alone with a phone flat on the table in front of him and a black coffee. I would not have paid him any mind, except he never once raised his voice, and in a loud room, a man who does not raise his voice is the only one you end up hearing. I got about 4 sentences of it. He said the word Palmer. That is what turned my head. Palmer is not a word you hear in Wisconsin. He said something about a bridge facility that was 2 payments past due. He said he was not interested in restructuring it again. And then he said, the collateral position I care about is the one in the old man's name. I did not move. I had a fork in my hand. He listened for a while. Then he said, and I am giving you this the way I heard it. I'm not a predator. I'm a cleanup man. Somebody has to do the cleanup. He put money under the coffee cup and stood up and put his coat on, and when he went past my table he said, excuse me, because my chair was in the aisle, and I said, no problem, and he went out. I sat there and finished my lunch. I did not know his name. I want you to understand that. I found out his name 11 days later in a parking lot from a young woman with a recorder in her hand, and by then it was almost too late to matter. But I knew right then, in a diner in Green Bay with a sandwich in front of me, that there was somebody else in this thing. Up until that lunch, I had been thinking about one man, my son-in-law. Take my name off the paper Friday morning, let the whole thing come down on his head, and that is the end of it. And a stranger in a gray suit had just told a telephone that what he wanted out of it was not his money back. He wanted the pit. I got back into Marquette County a little after 7 that night. The temperature sign at the bank on Washington said -19. $348,000 sitting in an account with my name on it. $62,000 in a cookie tin in the trunk. 27 hours until bids closed Wednesday morning. And the original of that lease, the 40-page one with a 1994 seal on it, the one piece of paper this whole thing stands on, was still sitting in a safe bolted to the floor of a trailer at the Palmer Pit, where I had not been welcome since Saturday. Leon Lamb has worked for me for 30 years, and in 30 years he has never asked me a question. He has told me things. That a belt was going, that a man was drinking, that the West Face was taking water and we would have a problem by April. Leon says what he sees and goes back to work. That Tuesday night at 9 o'clock, he stood at the gate at Palmer with his hand on the chain, and he asked me 3. I had called him from a gas station at 8 and said I needed 20 minutes in the office trailer. He did not ask why on the phone. He said he would be there. It was 26 below with no wind in Palmer at night in that kind of cold is one of the quietest places on this earth. The plant was down, the crusher was still. You could hear the transformer on the pole humming a quarter-mile off. He got the chain off and stood there holding it.
First question. He said, you all right?
I said I was fine. Second question. He said, there's a thing going around that they walked you out of the landmark Saturday, in front of the girl. That is not a question the way you and I would write one, but it was a question. I said it was true. He looked at the ground for a second. He is not a man who does anything with his face. Third question. He said, what are you here for? And I did not answer him. He waited on it. Then he pulled the gate open, got in his truck and drove ahead of me up to the trailer with his flashers going, the way he does for anybody coming in after dark, because that is procedure and Leon does not skip procedure for anybody, including me. Halfway up the Hall Road, I stopped my car. There is a face on the northeast side where we opened new bench in the fall. My headlights were on it, and in the frost, you could see a crack running up from the toe, a good clean vertical, and I had not seen that one before. I got out with the truck idling behind me, and I put my tape on it. 11 feet 4, 3/4 at the widest. Leon rolled his window down and said, Abram. I said I would just be a second. He said, it's 26 below and I've got the heater on for you. I wrote the number on my hand and got back in the car. You can call that whatever you want. I know what I was doing. I was measuring a rock because behind me was a man who had asked me a question I was not going to answer, and ahead of me was a trailer where I was going to find out something I did not want to know. Measuring is what my hands do when the rest of me will not. The trailer is a double wide on blocks with a steel stair up to the door. I put that stair in myself in 1998. Inside, everything was different. New sign on the door, New paint in the front room. My desk was gone, not moved, gone, and there was a folding table where it had been with a printer on it. And on the wall over where my desk used to sit, there was a rectangle of paint about 18 by 24 inches that was 2 shades lighter than everything around it, with 2 nail holes in the top of it. That was where Camille's picture hung. The one from the day we bought the pit, her standing on the running board of a 1989 Mac with her arm up on the mirror. I looked at that lighter rectangle for a while. I did not say anything about it, and Leon did not either. Then I went and checked the lock on the front door twice, which did not need checking, and then I checked the window latch in the back room, which did not need checking either. Leon pointed at the corner of the ceiling. He said, "Cameras run all night. They record local 30 days. I want you to know that before we open anything." I told him good. I said I wanted it on tape. The file safe is in the back room. Leon has the combination to the outer door and has had it since 2011. He spun it open, and there was the whole working guts of the place. Personnel folders, drill logs back to 1990, blasting records. And down in the bottom, bolted through the floor of that trailer into a steel plate underneath, there is a second safe. Small one. Firebox, about the size of a bread box. Leon said, "I've never had that one." I said, "I put that in 2003. He stepped back and let me get down on the floor, which at 74 is not a thing you do gracefully, and I knelt in front of it with my coat still on. 3 numbers. The 11, the 9th, the 74. Camille and me out in front of a church in Negaunee, both of us squinting. It opened. The lease was right there on top. 40 pages, blue backer, the county seal from 1994 embossed through the cover sheet so you could feel it with your thumb. I got it out and set it on the floor beside my knee. And underneath where it had been sitting, there was another file. Redweld tied shut. I had not come for that one. I did not know it existed. On the outside of the folder on the label, in a hand I have known my whole life because it is mine, was my own signature. I untied the folder on the floor of that trailer with my coat on and my knees on cold linoleum, and Leon Lamb stood in the doorway behind me and did not sit down the whole time. The top document was a permit renewal application. Form filed with the state 7 months back in August. Operator of record, Abram J. Robbins. Site, Palmer. Term, 5 years. And down at the bottom on the operator's line, my name in my own handwriting. Except it was not. I want you to understand how I knew inside of 2 seconds, because I did not have to think about it, and I did not have to compare it to anything. The A closed. I told you about my right thumb. 1972, an air track drill, a bit that walked when it should not have. The joint never came all the way back. When I write a capital A, I come up the first leg and across, and then my hand quits on me and I lift the pen and set the second leg down separate. It looks like a little gap. It has looked like that on every check and every purchase order and every bond I have signed since I was 22 years old. The A on that form was one clean stroke. Whoever did it had my signature in front of him. He had it good. The slant was right, the size was right, the way the B runs down under the line was right. He had practiced. He just did not know why the A has a gap in it. You would have to have watched my hand to know that. You would have to have cared enough to watch my hand. Underneath the signature line, there was a notary block, stamp seal commission number, and a name I did not know. A mobile notary out of Negaunee, the kind that comes to your office for $40 and witnesses a signature at your desk. I got out my pen and wrote that name and that commission number on my palm under the 11.4 and the 79 3/4 and everything else I had written on myself that week. She was not in on it. I want to say that now because it took me 2 days to be sure of it, and it matters. She got shown a photocopy of a driver's license and a man at a desk and a document that was already signed. That is how it works. She did what 100 of them do every day. Next in the folder was an email printed on plain paper. From Hannah Cross. Company counsel Marquette 40-something does the work for the aggregate outfits up here. 3 lines. August the 8th. She wrote that she had a concern about the execution of the operator's signature on the renewal, that the transfer process is the correct path and requires the outgoing operator's notarized consent, and that she recommended the filing be withdrawn and redone properly. There was no reply printed behind it. Somebody had printed that email and put it in a folder and locked it in a safe. I sat back on my heels. Here is what I understood on that floor, and it came all at once, the way a face comes down when the toe lets go. He never filed the transfer because he could not. A transfer needs my notarized consent, which means he would have had to come to my house and ask me and explain why, and explaining why means explaining Green Bay and a bridge loan 2 payments down. And a transfer needs the new operator to post a new bond, $2.1 million, which he did not have and could not get because he had already pledged the one that exists. So he did not transfer it. He renewed it under my name because that was the cheap door. And when his own lawyer put it in writing that this was wrong, he printed her email and locked it up. The last thing in the folder was a bid package, spiral-bound, tabbed about 1.5 inches thick, 5-year Fluxstone supply. Cover sheet with the new company name on it, prepared, checked, signed, ready. Bids close Wednesday, 10 a.m. I turned to the tabs at the back. Exhibit 4. Mandatory attachment, evidence of operator qualification. And it was a copy of that renewal. The one with the closed A on it? I knelt there in a trailer at midnight with a bid package in my hands, and I want to tell you what changed, because up until that moment, this was one kind of story, and after it, it was another. 2 days I had been carrying around a thing I could do. I could pull my name and put 60 people out on the road on a Friday, and I had been sick about it since the hallway at that state office. I did not have to do anything now. The bid was going in Wednesday morning, on top of a forged state document. It was going to be opened in public on Friday with the county sitting there. All of it was already in motion, and none of it was mine, and every piece of it had his hand on it and not mine. I did not have to blow anything up. I just had to be in the room. But you understand what that means. To be in the room, I had to let him carry that package up those steps Wednesday morning. I had to stand across the street and watch my daughter's husband walk to the edge with it in both arms, and say nothing until Friday. Leon said, "Abram." I put the lease and the folder under my arm and got up off that floor, and my knee cracked loud enough that he heard it. I told him I would call him. That was a lie too. I wanted on the record that by that point I had gotten fast at it. Both trucks were running down at the gate. That is what you do up here in February. You start it and leave it and stand next to it, and the exhaust goes straight up because there is no wind. 12:30 in the morning. Leon had the timesheets under his arm. He has handed me the timesheets on the last night of every month for 30 years, and he did not stop when the sign on the door changed because, in his head, I am still the man you hand them to. I took them out of habit. I was thinking about a bid package in the back seat. Names down the left, hours across initials in the last column. 2 pages stapled. I got to the bottom of page 2. Second name up from the bottom. Haley Nash, Lab Tech Aggregate Testing. Start date 2 weeks and 3 days before that night. I read it again. Then I turned the page over and looked at the back, which was blank, and turned it back and read it a third time under the yard light, with my breath going up in front of my face. My granddaughter had taken a job at my pit. 24 years old, married 9 days, and she had gone out and gotten herself work in the sample lab at Palmer, running sieve analysis and moisture on Fluxstone. And I did not know. Nobody in that family had said one word to me, not her mother, not her father. I sat 2 tables from the head at her wedding on Saturday and clapped when he announced they were staying in the county, and it never once crossed my mind to wonder what they would live on. I said something to Leon. I asked him how she was doing. He said, "She's good, careful, writes everything down twice." Then, she asked me not to make a thing of it. Didn't want anybody saying she got in on the name. Because of the name. 2 nights before, I had sat in a booth at Ralph's and counted 60 people like tons of rock, so that I would not have to put a single face on any of them. Well, there was a face on it now. Leon took the timesheets back and put them under his arm and did not put them in the truck. Then he said it. Same words as at the gate 4 hours earlier when I had let it go by. He said, "What are you here for, Abram?" And when I did not answer that time either, he kept going. which he does not do. He said, "There's a thing going around that payroll didn't run because there isn't any. Kate's brother works at the bank." He looked at the yard light instead of me. "I've got 59 other people. Cheryl's got a deposit down on a used Silverado, 400 and change a month. I told her go ahead." Then he said, "You remember when Empire cut the shift in '87? I said I remembered. He said, "Every man in this county said something about it. Every one of them. You were the only one who didn't say anything at all." I have thought about that sentence more than almost any other in my life. And I do not think Leon meant one thing by it. He was saying a true thing about a hard winter the way he says a belt is going. He said, "So I'm asking you, are you shutting this place down?" Here is where I want to be honest with you, because this is the part I would leave out if I were telling it to make myself look good. I had the answer. It was right there. Yes, on Friday morning, for at least a day and maybe forever, and I do not know yet, and I need you to not tell anybody, and I am sorry. That is what a man says. And I ran it standing there in the cold. If I tell Leon, Leon has to choose. He keeps it from 59 people who trust him. Or he tells them, and it gets back to Rhett by 7 in the morning, and the whole thing comes apart before Wednesday. Either way, it costs him something he cannot afford. So the decent thing is to carry it myself. That is what I told myself. I looked him in the face and I said, "No. This pit is going to run." And every word of that was true. It is running today. It ran the summer after, and it is running this morning while I am telling you this. It just was not going to run Friday or Saturday or Sunday, and he would find that out the same minute as everybody else outside a chained gate. Leon looked at me for about 2 seconds. Then he nodded and said, "All right." And then he said, "Thank you." That is the part. He said, "Thank you." He got in his truck and he pulled the gate closed behind me, and he went home and he told his wife to go ahead and sign for the truck. I drove out of Palmer at 1 in the morning with a forged permit and a 50-year-old lease on the seat beside me. I had lied to a man who has never once lied to me, and I had told myself it was mercy. And somewhere in a rented house in Negaunee, my granddaughter was asleep, 9 days married, with a lab coat hanging on the back of a door, and her first paycheck from that pit already spent on something. She was going to lose that job on Friday morning, along with 59 other people whose names I could have told you all week and would not let myself say. I was at the Glass at Eagle at 20 of 10 on Wednesday morning with the lease under my arm, and I had not slept. Dexter Huffman came out with the form already in his hand. I did not have to ask for it, and I have wondered since how many times that week he had thought about which drawer it was in. Withdrawal of operator of record. He walked me through it line by line, and at the effective date box, he stopped, read me the citation number digit by digit, and told me the rule lets the filer select a date up to 7 days out. He said, "Most people write today." I wrote Friday, 9 o'clock in the morning. He looked at it. He looked at me over the top of his glasses. He said, "You understand that at 9:01 on Friday morning, that pit is required to be shut down." I said I understood. He said, "Are you sure, Mr. Robbins?" I have been asked that question maybe 4 times in my life by somebody who actually wanted the answer. I said yes. He stamped it and gave me the yellow carbon and did not say anything else, and I put that sheet in my coat pocket and went outside and crossed the street. 10 o'clock, the county administration building. There is a bench across from it, and I did not sit on it. I stood by a parked car with my collar up, watching the front steps of a building I have walked into 100 times. Rhett came up the sidewalk at 4 minutes to 10. He had the bid package in both arms, not under one arm the way you carry a folder, both arms against his chest. And I stood across the street and watched my son-in-law carry that thing up the steps like a man carrying a baby into a church. There was a young woman on the steps with a camera. She got 2 frames of him going up and followed him in. I found out later she was Destiny Schaefer from the Mining Journal, and it was a routine bid day item for the business page. He shook hands in the lobby. I could see it through the glass. 2 county people, then the man from the road commission. He is good at that. He remembers a man's kids. He never looked across the street. And then Janelle came up the walk behind him. She had the duplicate binder, the backup you bring in case the clerk wants a second set. She has carried that binder to every bid I ever filed since she was 24. She was 8 or 9 steps behind him. She turned her head and saw me next to that parked car. She stopped. Half a second, maybe less. Her foot came down and she did not take the next step, and she looked right at me across 2 lanes of 3rd Street. Then she went up the stairs and inside. I have run that half-second more times than I can count. I did not know what it was, fear or shame or a warning or nothing at all, a woman losing her footing on a salted step. I told myself it was nothing, and I went and got coffee I did not drink. Dexter called me at 3:10 that afternoon. He did not say hello. He said, "Mr. Robbins, I need to tell you something, and I want to be careful how I say it." Then he read me a citation number, digit by digit. A second application had been filed that morning. Application for transfer of operator of record from Abram J. Robbins to Superior Aggregate Group. Consent of outgoing operator notarized dated that day. My signature. Filed at 11:15 Wednesday morning, about an hour after his bid package went in the slot, and an hour and a half after I stood on 3rd Street and watched him carry it up. He had not been sitting still either. I stood in a parking lot with the phone against my ear and my other hand flat on the roof of that rented Chevy. Dexter said the department processes applications in order of receipt. I had heard him say that sentence on Monday. It had been the most boring thing anybody said to me all week. Here is what it meant now. 2 filings, same file. Mine dated to take effect Friday at 9, his filed live on Wednesday. If a reviewer picks up that transfer and approves it before Friday morning, the operator of record becomes the company. And if the operator is the company, my withdrawal is the withdrawal of a man who is no longer the operator, which is a piece of paper about nothing. The permit stands, the bid stands. Friday comes and goes, and a county board opens 4 envelopes and awards a 5-year contract, and the whole thing closes over the top of it like water. Dexter said, "I can't refuse to process a facially complete application. I don't have that authority." Then he said, "What I can do is note a dispute on the file. If the operator of record contests the execution of a consent in writing under oath, I have to flag it, and it stops moving until that's resolved. Under oath. In writing. Signed." I want you to be clear about what he was telling me to do. He was telling me to walk into that office and swear out a statement that my son-in-law forged my name on a state document. Not let it come out. Not stand in the back of a room on Friday and let the paper speak for itself and keep my hands clean the way I had planned it at midnight on the floor of that trailer. Swear it out. My name on the bottom, my hand on the pen. The man is married to my daughter. He is the father of the girl whose wedding I got walked out of on Saturday. Dexter said the office opens at 8. She knocked on the door of room 12 at 9 o'clock that night. I do not know how she found me. I never asked. There are 4 motels between Marquette and Negaunee, and my daughter has known how I think since she was 9 years old. She did not say she was sorry. I want that on the record right at the front because I have gone back and forth about it for a long time, and I have come down on the side of it being the best thing she could have done. She held out a notebook. Graph paper. Cheap. Same kind as the one that came out of the tin. She said, "You should have this." I put it on the dresser without opening it. I got the second chair from by the window, the plastic one, and set it across from mine, and she sat down in her coat. I made coffee in that little 4-cup pot they leave in a motel room. I checked the wall heater. I got up and checked it a second time. I could not have hugged that girl if you had paid me $1,000. She started talking, and she did it the way she does a quarterly. In order. First this, then this, then this. No adjectives. My daughter has been the money in that company since she was 24 years old, and when it costs her something to say a thing, she says it like she is reading a column of figures, because that is the only way it comes out at all. She said she picked 8:40 on purpose. She said Rhett is never watching her at exactly one moment in an evening, and that is when people are coming up to congratulate him. He gets absorbed. She said she had been waiting on that all night standing by the side door, and when the band stopped for the dances, she knew that was it. That was the window, and she went. I asked, "Why the bag?" She said, because everything else gets a question. Then she gave it to me plain the way she gives me a number. A suitcase in the front hall gets asked about. A box gets opened because a box is interesting, and he opens things that are interesting. Anything in the truck gets seen. She said she had been trying to work out how to get that tin out of the cedar chest and into my hands for 4 days. She said nobody stops a garbage bag. She had loaded it Thursday, 2 days before. She said it took her about 20 minutes because she kept putting the gloves in and taking them out and putting them back in, and she could not have told me why. That is when I put it together about the notebooks. She writes in pencil, on graph paper, in a hand that slants a little to the right and stops dead at the end of a line. Her mother did too. Exactly. If you put a page of Camille's and a page of Janelle's side by side on that dresser, and I have since, you could not tell me which was which without reading the words. Nobody taught her that. She just came up in that house watching a woman at a kitchen table with a pencil, the way I came up watching my father grease a machine, and it went into her and stayed. I asked her the question then. I asked her why she did not give it to me 3 years ago. She did not answer. I asked her why not 2 years ago, when Rhett changed the name on the sign and I signed whatever he put in front of me. She did not answer. I asked her why not 6 months ago, and she sat in a plastic chair in a motel room and looked at the wall heater and did not say one word. I have been in a lot of quiet rooms. I have stood in a change house with 22 envelopes in my hand. I have sat in a hospital in Marquette for 11 hours in 2021. That was the longest 30 seconds I have ever been through. A salt truck went by out on 41, and the light came across the ceiling and went off it again. She did not cry. She has not cried in front of me since she was 14. Then she stood up and put her hood back on. At the door, she stopped with her hand on it, and she said, "There's a reason. Mom left me something. I've had it 3 years. I said, "Then tell me." She said, "I can't do it here." And then she said the thing that I did not understand until the next afternoon, sitting at her mother's kitchen table with the dust still on it. She said, "Tomorrow." Not because I'm making you wait, because I've said it in my head about 4,000 times and it has never once come out of my mouth, and I need to be somewhere she was. She went out to her car. I stood in the doorway of room 12 in my socks in the cold and watched her back out. And I raised my hand about halfway up, and I do not know if she saw it. Then I went in and sat on the edge of that bed with the coffee I had made her, which she never touched, going cold on the nightstand. And the notebook was still sitting on the dresser where I had put it. Closed. I did not open it that night either. The office opens at 8. I was there at 10 of. Dexter had the affidavit form and a notary of his own on the second floor. He read me the citation number digit by digit, and then he told me that a false statement on that form is itself a felony, and that he was required to say so and would have said so to anybody. I gave him the commission number off my palm. It was 3 days old by then, and I had gone over it twice with a pen. The statement is 4 sentences long. It says the signature on the consent to transfer is not mine. It says I did not appear before that notary on that date. It says I did not authorize any person to execute a consent on my behalf. It says I make this statement under penalty of perjury. There is a line at the bottom. I have signed my name maybe 200,000 times. I have signed it on the hood of a truck at 20 below with a man holding a flashlight. That one took me a while. I put the pen down and picked it back up, and then I signed it. And the A did what the A does, and I lifted my hand and set the second leg down separate, and the woman stamped it. Dexter took the form and put it in the file and made the notation. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Robbins. He is the only person in this entire business who said that to me. Not my daughter, not my lawyer, not the man who did it. A state employee at a counter with 1 year left before his pension." I drove out to Palmer that afternoon. Not the pit, the house. The one Camille and I bought in 1978 and put a second story on in 1986, where I have slept every night of my life since, except for the 4 I had just spent in room 12. Janelle was already there. She had let herself in with her key and made coffee, and she was sitting at her mother's kitchen table. You have to understand about that table, it is a maple drop leaf, and it sat under the window on the east wall, and Camille did the invoices at it for 40 years. After she died, I moved my business to the counter. I have not sat down at that table since 2021, and I have not run a rag over it either. There is a rectangle of dust on it about the size of a ledger pad. Janelle had her coffee on the dusty part, and she had not wiped it. She said, "Sit down, Dad." Then she said it, and she said it the way you say something you have had by heart for a long time. Not fast, not slow, every word in its place. Mom said, "Don't give it to him until he has lost everything, not one day sooner, because as long as he still has one thing left to hold on to, he will keep signing whatever gets put in front of him to keep anybody in this house from raising their voice." I sat there in my coat. Janelle said, "That's it, word for word. I've had that in my head for 3 years." Then she gave me the rest of it, the working part. She said if she had handed me that tin any time before Saturday, I would have gone straight to Rhett with it, not to a lawyer, to Rhett. I would have sat him down and said, "Now, son, let us straighten this out between us," and he would have talked, and I would have believed him, and inside of a week that money would have been in a bridge loan in Green Bay. She was right. I want to be honest here and say she was right, and I did not argue with her at that table, and I would not argue with her now. Then she told me why it had to happen in front of 180 people. She said Rhett had to believe it completely, not suspect it, believe it. Because the minute he wondered whether she was still on my side, he would have looked at the accounts and the safe, and eventually he would have looked at a trust document from 1994, and it would all have been over. She said 180 witnesses was the cheapest insurance I could buy. I asked her about Haley. She said Haley has not spoken to her since Saturday night. We sat there for a while, with the light going down the way it does at 4. And then my daughter asked me a question. She said, "Are you angry at Mom?" Here it was. I want you to see this because it is the whole of me in one place. Sitting right there in my chest was everything. That my wife knew what I was in 1993 and started a fund for it. That she watched me sign a stack of papers for 30 years and never once said stop. That I stood in a change house in March of 1987 with 22 envelopes and could not open my mouth, and my wife knew that about me, and she planned around it like it was weather. That was all right there. My daughter had opened the door and stood back from it. I said no. Then I asked her what time the bid opening started on Friday and whether we ought to sit together or apart. She looked at me for about 2 seconds, the same 2 seconds Leon gave me at that gate. She let it go. She said 9 o'clock, and she said apart. Camille loved me enough to build me a raft 30 years before the water came, and she knew me well enough to make our daughter hold it back until I was under. I sat at that table, and I could not tell you which of those 2 things I could not forgive her for. I still cannot. The bid opening was in the second-floor conference room at the County Administration Building, 9 o'clock Friday morning, and it is open to the public because it has to be. I sat in the last row with my coat on. There were about 30 people, 4 bidders with their people, 2 from the road commission, a man from the pellet plant who buys the flux, purchasing staff, the county attorney, a woman from Chocolate Township who comes to everything, and knits. Destiny Schaefer sat at the end of the back row with her phone face down on the table. Hannah Cross was in the second row on the aisle, dark coat still on, a thin folder flat on her lap, both hands on top of it. I had never met the woman face to face. She did not look at anybody, and she did not take her coat off, and I remember thinking that a person does not sit in a warm room in a wool coat for an hour unless she is planning on leaving fast or on standing up. Rhett and Janelle were in the third row on the other side. He had his arm along the back of her chair. She had her bag on her lap with both hands on the clasp, and she did not take her coat off either. At 9 o'clock they started. There is nothing dramatic about a bid opening. A woman named Peggy reads the envelopes. Name of bidder, base bid unit prices alternates. She reads them like she is reading a grocery list, and men write numbers on legal pads. 4 bids on the 5-year Fluxstone supply. 2 of them were high, the kind of number an outfit puts in when it does not really want the work. 1 was competitive. Superior Aggregate Group came in low, about 4% under the nearest, which, in this business, is a mile. I heard Rhett let his breath out from 4 rows back. One of the road commission men had already started writing on his pad the way you do when the thing is decided. Then Peggy went to the compliance check. That is a formality. It is a checklist. Bid bond addenda, acknowledgement, non-collusion, affidavit, evidence of operator qualification. She got to Exhibit 4. She read the permit number off the copy in the package, and she opened her laptop to the state portal to confirm it, which is a thing they do in about 11 seconds, and nobody in the room ever watches. She stopped. She scrolled. Then she turned the laptop toward the county attorney and said something to him that nobody could hear. He looked at it for a while. Then he asked her to read it into the record. She said the permit for the Palmer site shows 3 filings in the last 4 days. A withdrawal of operator of record filed Wednesday, effective today at 9 a.m. An application for transfer of operator of record filed Wednesday, and a notice of disputed execution filed Thursday morning by the operator of record under oath. She said the file status is contested. You could hear the ventilation. Somebody's chair creaked and then stopped, like the man in it had thought better of moving. The county attorney did not make a speech. He said that evidence of operator qualification is a mandatory attachment that the state file for that permit is in dispute as of yesterday, and the operator of record's withdrawal took effect at 9 this morning, and that the bid could not be found responsive on its face. He asked the chair to declare the bid non-responsive. The chair declared it. The whole thing took about 30 seconds. Nobody raised his voice. A man in the second row turned a page. Rhett turned around in his seat and looked at the back of the room. He found me in about 2 seconds, which tells you he had been wondering where I was since he walked in that morning. I did not do anything. I want to be clear about that. I sat in a folding chair in the last row of a county conference room with my hands on my knees, and I looked at him, and I did not stand up, and I did not say one word, and that is exactly how I had planned it since midnight Tuesday on the floor of a trailer. He stood up. He started talking fast. He was good even then, I will give him that. He said this is an administrative error. He said the file status can be resolved this afternoon. He said the department is aware of it. He said the county has the discretion to hold the award over 1 cycle, and he cited the section. He said he could have a letter from counsel in an hour. He said the word counsel, and he did not look at Hannah Cross, and Hannah Cross did not look at him. The county attorney let him finish, which is a mercy they extend to a man in that position, and then said the file could be cured and the project could be rebid in the fall. The fall. 8 months out on a 5-year contract that was his whole year and probably his whole company. Rhett kept standing. He had his hand out, palm up, the way you do when you have one more thing. And while he was standing there in the 3rd row with his hand out and 30 people looking at him, my daughter got up out of the chair beside him. She did not look at him. She walked up the center aisle to the long table where Peggy and the county attorney were sitting, and she took a manila envelope out of her bag, and she set it down on the table in front of them. Then she stayed standing. The county attorney asked her who she was, which is a fair question. Everybody in that room knew Janelle Robbins. She has stood at that table with a bid binder since she was 24. She said, "I'm the Chief Financial Officer of Superior Aggregate Group." Then she said, "I'm not here in that capacity." She opened the envelope, thumb under the flap, no tearing, and she laid the contents face up and squared them with 2 fingers before she said anything else. She said, "I'm the successor trustee of the Camille W. Robbins Mineral Trust. I accepted the appointment 3 years ago last November." I did not know that. I had been carrying a certified copy of that trust since Saturday night. I read the thing 4 times in a motel room. I stood at the Register of Deeds on Monday and watched a clerk pull the original. The word successor is on page 2, 2nd paragraph, 3rd line. Successor trustee and then a name, and the name is my daughter's. I read right past it. 4 times. Because it is a word in a document, and documents are a language I have spent 45 years handing to somebody else. She read from the lease. She read the parties and the recording data, first book and page, so the record would be clean. Her voice did not do anything. It was the voice she uses on the second Tuesday of the month, taking a board through a quarterly with nothing in it to be afraid of. That is what made the room go cold. Then she read one clause. The mineral lease on the Palmer parcel terminates automatically, without notice, and without cure upon any change in the operator of record occurring, absent prior written consent of the lessor. Then she said, the lessor is the trust. The trust has never given written consent. It was never asked. Peggy had stopped writing. The county attorney laid his pen down flat and turned it a quarter turn with one finger, which lawyers do when they need 3 seconds. Janelle said, the operator of record withdrew effective 9 o'clock this morning. That is a change in the operator of record. As of 9 o'clock this morning, by its own terms, the lease is terminated. She put a second document on the table. She said it was a notice of termination, that under the instrument, the trustee is required to execute it, and that she was executing it now, in front of the board, so there would be no question about the time. She took a pen out of the side pocket of her bag, not the one clipped in the binder, the side pocket where a person keeps what they put there on purpose that morning. It was a ballpoint, blue. My daughter has written in pencil her whole life. Number 2 graph paper so it can be fixed. I told you what her mother said about ink. I have said it to her myself at that same kitchen table. She held that pen over the signature line and she stopped. Half a second. Same as on the steps Wednesday. Then she signed it in ink and she put the cap back on and she set the pen down on the table beside the page. Nobody in that room understood what they had just watched except me. 30 people saw a woman sign a form. I saw my daughter decide that this one was not going to be fixed later. She said one more thing, not to the board and not loud. The first 2 rows heard it. The man from the pellet plant told me later he did not. She said, this is my mother's. Then she stood there. Rhett did not look at the table, not at the county attorney who was reading the termination notice with a finger on the page, not at Hannah Cross, and not back at me. He looked at his wife. He turned all the way in that folding chair row so his back was to the table and to the board and to every person in the room, and he looked at her. And he said, how long? Just that. 2 words with no question mark in them. 6 years of marriage in 2 words. And a company and a bridge loan in Green Bay, and a girl in a lab coat at Palmer running sieve analysis, and a wedding on Saturday with 180 people listening to him talk about hands that know when to let go. How long? She said 3 years. She did not say it as a confession, and she did not say it as a weapon. She said it the way she gives me a number when I ask her for a number. Something went out of him then. I have seen a wall come down when the toe lets go, and there is a moment before it moves where the whole face changes color. It is not the falling that tells you. It is the color. He stood in that row, and he went that color. His company lost the bid at 9:09. It lost the permit at 9. And now the ground under the pit, all of it inside 20 minutes in a public meeting on the record with a reporter in the back row. And none of that is what did it. What did it was that his wife had been holding the pin for 3 years, and he never once thought to ask her whether she had it. He turned around. He looked at the back of the room at me, at a 74-year-old man sitting in a folding chair in a borrowed coat who had not said one word since he walked in the building. And he said, March of '87. He did not raise his voice either. That is the thing about that whole morning. Nobody in that room raised his voice once. He said, March 6th, 1987. You laid off 22 men at the Change House at Palmer. He said my father was one of them. Wesley Nash, powderman, 16 years. I knew. I have known since the day my daughter brought him to dinner and said his last name, and I never said one word about it in 20 years, not to him and not to her, and I told myself that was out of respect. Rhett said he set that envelope on the kitchen table and it sat there 3 days. He would not open it. My mother finally did. He said, I was 12. I watched you from the parking lot. You had them in your hand and you handed them out one at a time and you looked at every man. Then he said it. He said, and you didn't say anything? Somebody's chair moved in the second row. He said, not one word. 22 men. My dad talked about it until he died. Not the layoff. He understood the layoff. He was a mining man. That is what happens. He talked about the not saying anything. He said, "You don't owe my father $1. You owe him a sentence." I want to tell you what I did with that. Nothing. I sat in a folding chair with my hands on my knees and my coat on, and I did not move. Rhett stood there with tears coming down his face and no sound at all, and he was not doing it for the room. I have watched men work a room my whole life. That was not that. That was a thing packed into a man since he was 12, picking its own time to come out. Then he did the other thing. He said, "I signed his name on the renewal." He said it out loud in a public bid opening with a reporter in the back row and 30 people writing on legal pads. And here is why. It was over already, and he knew it. My affidavit was on that file sworn. Hannah's email was in a safe at Palmer, and he knew it was there because he put it there. There was a notary commission number in Nagani that would not hold up to one phone call. There was no version of that morning where it stayed a secret past Tuesday. So he took it himself instead of waiting for it to be taken. And then he said the part I have thought about every day since. He said, "I forged it because if I asked him, he wouldn't have said no." He said he would have looked at me, then at the paper, and he would have signed it, or he wouldn't, and either way he wasn't going to say anything to me about it, not one word, and I couldn't take one more year of it. The county attorney said his name once, quietly, the way you do when a man is about to say something he cannot walk back. Rhett sat down. And that is when Hannah Cross stood up. She went up the aisle with that thin folder and put 3 things on the table. A printout of an email dated August the 8th with a timestamp on it sent from her to him recommending the filing be withdrawn and redone properly. A memo to file from 2.5 years back, recording that she advised Abram J. Robbins on 3 separate occasions to retain independent counsel before executing the reorganization documents, and that he declined each time. And a 1-page log of the dates. She said the file cuts both ways. I'll let the board read it. Then she went back to her seat and sat down and put her hands on her lap and looked straight ahead. I have never spoken to that woman about any of it. Not before, not since. She had told me to get my own lawyer 3 times, and I had told her she worked for my company, so that was that. And she wrote it down because that is what a professional does when an old man will not listen. Both of those pages were true at the same time. So the room went quiet. And 30 people, and the county attorney and a reporter with her phone face down, and my daughter still standing at that table, all turned and looked at the back row, at me. Because I was the only one who had not said anything, and it was my turn. I put my hands on my knees, and I stood up. My whole life was in that room. A man had just told a county board that my silence broke his father. My own lawyer had put on the record that I would not take advice. My wife built a fund in 1993 because she knew what I was, and my daughter carried it 3 years because she knew too. I had the paper, I had the law, I had the truth about the signature, and it was sworn and stamped. I stood there with my mouth open, and I could not get one word out of it. I have never been able to explain what that is. It is not that I do not know what to say. I knew exactly what to say. There is just no road between the place it sits and the place it comes out. And at 74, in a county conference room with everybody I have left looking at me, I found out there still was not. My hand was in my coat pocket, and it was around that tape measure, and I heard the case crack. I sat back down. I got out of that building at about 10:15, and I did not talk to anybody on the way. The lot is on the north side. 11 below, and clear, the kind of morning where the light comes off the snow and you cannot look at anything directly. The Chevy was in the 3rd row. I had the keys in my hand from the time I stood up. I put the key at the door, and it did not go in. I want to be careful here because it sounds like nothing. It is nothing. A man misses a keyhole. I moved my thumb and lined it up again, and it caught on the edge and slid off. 3rd time it went in 1/4 inch and stopped. And I pushed and it did not go, and I took it out and looked to make sure I had the right key. It was the right key. It is the only key on that ring besides my house. fourth time my hand came up and the key was not in my fingers anymore. I heard it hit the running board and then the pavement. I looked down at it. It was lying flat on the salt with the fob half under the tire. 60 years of hands. I have set trigger on a jaw crusher with a bar and a hammer. I have repacked a pump seal at 20 below with the wind coming across the pit. I did not pick it up. I stood there a second, and then I opened the door because I had never locked it in the first place, and I sat down in the driver's seat and pulled the door shut. I did not start it. I put my forehead on the wheel. I want to tell you what happens in a cold car when a man breathes. The glass frosts from the inside. It goes from the bottom corners up in a pattern like a fern, and it keeps going until you cannot see out, and it is your own breath doing it. I watched that happen across the whole windshield. It takes longer than you would think, and it does not stop where you expect it to. I was in that car 19 minutes. I know it was 19 because I looked at the clock when I sat down and looked again when I lifted my head. And there is not one thing I can say about that in my own defense. My son-in-law had just told a room what my silence cost his father. My daughter had just given up her mother's ground to end it, and I sat in a parking lot and timed myself. I measure. It is what my hands do. It is what they did on the floor of a motel room at 1 in the morning and on a rock face at 26 below with a man waiting on me in a warm truck. And it is what they did in that parking lot. It is what I have got. My phone went off on the passenger seat somewhere in there. I could see the screen from where I was. Leon Lamb. By then, it was 20 of 11. The withdrawal took effect at 9, and a state inspector had almost certainly called that pit by 10. 60 people were standing in the yard at Palmer and 11 below, asking each other what a cease order is. Leon had told his wife to go ahead and sign for the truck. I let it ring out. I did not touch it. Then, somebody knocked on the glass. It was the young woman from the back row. No hat, holding her phone flat in her palm with the recorder going and the screen turned up so you can see she is not hiding it. I put the window down about 4 inches. She said she was Destiny Schaefer with the Mining Journal and asked if I had a comment on this morning. I said no. She said she understood. Then she asked a second question, and I have come to believe she asked it because she wanted me to have the information and there was no other way to hand it over. She said the paper had gotten a call yesterday afternoon from a private lender in Wisconsin who holds paper on Superior Aggregate. She said he had been asking what the reporting timeline looked like on a permit dispute. I said, which lender? She looked down at her phone and read it off. She said, Damian Bonilla. Gray suit, mid-50s, black coffee, 2 tables over on Main Street in Green Bay on Tuesday. I am not a predator. I am a cleanup man. Somebody has to do the cleanup. I sat there with the window down 4 inches and 11 below coming in on my face. 6 days. 6 days from a garbage bag on a dance floor to that parking lot, and I had gotten every single thing I set out to get. The permit, the lease, the truth about the signature, sworn and stamped and read into a public record. And I was sitting in a rented car I could not get the key into, with a foreman calling me who I had lied to, and a granddaughter in a lab coat standing in a yard in the cold. And a man I had never been introduced to had already called a newspaper about it. Destiny Schaefer thanked me and went back inside. I sat there a while longer. Then I got out and I picked the key up off the pavement and I got back in. I drove out to Palmer that afternoon because I was not going to hear it on a telephone. The gate was chained. There was a state notice zip-tied to the fence laminated and a sheriff's deputy sitting in his car up on the county road doing nothing because that is what they do. There were about 40 vehicles in the lot outside the gate and 100 yards of men standing in the wind. They were not angry. That is what I was not ready for. Men in this county have stood outside chained gates for 130 years and they know how. They stand in 2s and 3s with their hands in their coats and talk about other things. They got quiet when they saw my car. Haley was over by the scale house on the other side, in her lab coat with a parka over it, standing by herself about 20 feet from anybody. She did not come over. She did not look away either. She just looked at me and I looked at her, and that is the whole of what passed between my granddaughter and me that day. Leon came down from the gate. I have known that man since he was 28, and I have seen him mad twice. This was not that. He came down easy, hands in his pockets. He said, "Tuesday night at the gate." I said yes. He said, "I asked you a straight question, and you looked at me and lied." I could have given him the whole thing right there. Permits and successor trustees and a forged A. He would have stood in that cold and heard all of it out. I said the true thing instead, because I owed him that much, and it was about all I left. I said, "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to put it on you. You'd have had to choose between me and them, and I didn't want you to have to choose." Leon thought about it. Then he said, "You chose for me." He let that sit a second. Then he said, 30 years, I have handed you the timesheets." And then he called me Mr. Robbins. He said, "We'll be here Monday, Mr. Robbins, whatever you figure out." And he went back up to the gate. He has called me that ever since. Every time. It has been 8 months, and he has not called me Abram once.
I did not know that a man could take a thing away from you that quietly.
I drove up to Big Bay. Sloan had the fax pages spread across that kitchen table in the order she wanted them, and she did not ease into it. The surety had already moved. They got the news out of Marquette Friday morning, and by that afternoon they had called Rhett's personal guarantee on the bridge facility. That is between him and them, and it will follow him the rest of his life. Then she put her finger on the second page. The overburdened contract on the Presque Isle ore dock approach. The one Dexter Huffman had mentioned in a hallway on Monday like it was a footnote, and that I had filed like a footnote. It was 31% complete. There is an open cutout there with a slope on it that will not hold through a spring melt. Under the rule, unfinished work on a permitted site has to be completed or properly closed within 90 days of a change in operator. If it is not, the site goes on the state's violation list. And a site on that list cannot be permitted again. Not by me, not by anybody. Not in 5 years and not in 50. The ground stays dead. I said, "So who finishes it?" Sloan said, "That is the whole question, isn't it? Not the company. It has no permit and no lease and a surety chewing on it. Not the trust. Janelle owns rock, not a mining operation. Not Bonilla. Me. If I file to be reinstated as operator of record and post a $2.1 million reclamation bond, which the surety will write for a 74-year-old man on a rush for $1,050,000 in cash collateral." Sloan laid it out with a pencil so I could see both columns. Keep the money. About $110,000 my house. No obligations, a dead pit on my wife's ground, and 60 people looking for work in a county where there is not any. Or write the check. 90 days to finish a slope job on Lake Superior in March. 74 years old. And a $2.1 million bond hanging over my head until that ground is closed and released, which will be years after I am dead. I asked her about the man in the gray suit. She said Damian Bonilla runs a private fund out of Green Bay and has been buying distressed mineral positions across 3 states for a decade. He is not a criminal. He does not break rules. He waits for an operation to fail, buys the ground clean, and either sits on it or sells it. She said, he grew up in a mining town in Wisconsin. Whole town went down in the 80s. There is nothing there now. I drove home to Palmer at dark, and there was a black sedan parked on the road in front of my house with the engine off, and a man in a gray suit standing on my porch with his hands folded in front of him, waiting on me like he had an appointment. He came that night, and again the following week, and I am going to tell it as one conversation because that is how it sits in my head. The first thing Damian Bonilla said to me was about the porch. He said somebody had done the rail posts by hand, and not with a jig, and he was right. I did them in 1991 with a chisel. He waited to be asked to sit down. When I asked him, he sat, and he took his gloves off first and folded them on his knee. He did not threaten me once, not in any way. He did not raise his voice, he did not mention a lawyer, and he never said a word like, unfortunately. He made an offer. He would buy the mineral estate from the trust and take an assignment of the permit position. The number was fair. It would be easier for me to tell you he tried to steal it. He did not. It was a real number, enough that I could have lived out my life in that house and never worried about a furnace or a roof again. And he said he would assume the reclamation obligation, all 2.1 million of it, off my name in writing at closing. That was the part. On my own porch in the first week of March, with the snow going soft, a man I had never been introduced to offered to take the noose off my neck and hand me enough to be an old man in peace. Then he told me why he does it. He grew up in a town in Wisconsin that had a mine and then did not have a mine. He was 11 when it went. He said what stayed with him was not the closing. It was the 10 years after, when the place kept trying. Half the storefronts open, everybody waiting on a reopening that was never coming. Men driving 2 hours each way and calling it temporary. He said nobody would say it was over, so it took 10 years to die instead of 1. And then he laid it out for me, and this is the part I have not been able to put down since. He said my pit was already dying, and Rhett Nash did not start it. 3 bids lost in 4 years. No written reclamation plan on file, which is true, I never did one. I had it in my head. Equipment run past its life because I knew every bearing in it personally. A book of business held together by handshakes with men who were retiring. A 74-year-old operator with no succession plan. He said, "Your son-in-law is the reason it went down this year instead of in 4. That is the entire difference he made." Then he said, "You're saving something that is already dead, Mr. Robbins. I'm just the only one willing to say so out loud." And here is what I want you to understand. He was right. Not partly, not from his side of it. He was right, and I knew it while he was saying it, and I have not found the flaw in it in the 8 months since. I did not argue with him. I could not have. I got up and went in the house and came back out with my wife's notebook, graph paper, pencil, 19 land contracts, a name and a date and a payment schedule on each one going back to 1993. I put it on the table between us. I did not open it. I had not read past the first page of that book. And I want you to hold on to that. And I said the only thing I said to that man all night. I said, my wife carried paper on 19 houses in this county. Every one of them was a family that had just lost a job. She never once asked which of them was going to make it. He looked at that notebook for a while. Then he said, "No, I don't imagine she did." He stood up, buttoned his coat, put a card on the table, and at the bottom of the steps he stopped and said one more thing, and there was nothing in his voice but what he meant. He said, "I hope you're right." Then he drove off, and the sedan went down the county road with its lights on and turned toward 41. One thing plain, I never filed a criminal complaint about that signature. The county had it, the state had it, the paper printed it, and none of that was mine to stop. But I never walked into a prosecutor's office and swore out a complaint against Rhett Nash. And it was not mercy. It was that my daughter signed every check in that company for 6 years, and a forgery investigation goes through the CFO. I was not going to put Janelle in a room with an investigator to get at him. The next morning, I signed the collateral agreement and wired $1,050,000. That left me $108,000 and change at 74, with a $2.1 million bond in my name that will not be released until that ground is closed, which will be after I am dead. Wednesday afternoon, the state cleared the reinstatement and the plant came back up. I was at the gate when the belt started. 60 people walked in past me to make the shift. Not one of them clapped. Nobody said a word about it. They just went to work, which is the whole of what they had ever wanted from me.
And I stood there and understood that it was exactly what I had coming. The ice went out on Lake Superior on the 17th of May.
Up here, that is a date people say out loud. Somebody at the counter tells you the ice went out and you nod, and it means the year has turned. That was the same day I finally read my wife's notebook. I had carried that thing 3 months. I put it on a table between me and a man who wanted to buy my ground, and I never opened past the first page. Saturday morning at the kitchen table in the sun, I went down the column of names. 19 of them in pencil, 1993 through about 2004. Payment schedules on the right. Marks where she went back and changed a number and did not erase it, just crossed it and wrote over the way she did. Line 11. W. Nash Nagani, 1993, $137 per month. I read it 3 times. Then I sat back in the chair. Wesley Nash, Powder Man, 16 years. The man whose envelope sat on a kitchen table in the Ghani for 3 days because he would not open it. My wife carried that family's mortgage. 6 years after the layoff, when no bank would touch a man with that work history, Camille sat at this table and wrote out a land contract for $137 a month, and Wesley Nash and his wife and their 12-year-old son kept a roof. She never said one word to me about it. Not in 1993, not in the 30 years after. I sat across from her at this table every night of my life, and she never told me. She did the thing I could not do. Quietly in pencil under my own roof for 3 decades, while I went on believing that not talking about a thing was the same as putting it behind you. I did not take out my tape. I want you to know that. I sat with it. The other things in order because you should have them. We finished the Presque Isle cut on day 87 of 90. Leon ran it. We rented 2 excavators we could not afford and worked 6 days a week through a bad March, and the slope held. The sign on the trailer went back to Robbins Rock and Mineral in April. I called the office number from my own kitchen just to hear it, and the girl who answers said the name that was painted on my first truck, and I hung up before she could ask who was calling. Janelle filed in March. It was done by summer. She took a job doing the books for a trucking outfit in Marquette. She did not ask me for anything, and I did not offer, and I think we both understood why. Rhett is in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. He runs nights at a quarry down there. That is all I know, and it is all I have asked. She came out to the pit in the middle of May. We stood on the bench above the north face, where you can see the water, belt running below us, 48 degrees, which up here in May is warm. She told me about the gloves. She said Haley took my work gloves out of that garbage bag before she loaded it. Both of them. They are in the box with her veil, and Janelle only knows because she found them there in April looking for something else. Then she said Haley still has not called her. 3 months. I want to tell you what I did next, and it took me 74 years. I took that tape measure out of my coat. The case is cracked from the county building, and the blade does not lock right. I set it down on the rock beside me, and I told my daughter about March of 1987. I told her I had a sentence ready for those men, and never said it. I told her I have thought for 40 years that I was giving them their dignity by not making a speech, and what I was doing was making them guess. I told her her mother knew that about me in 1993 and started carrying paper on their houses instead of telling me to open my mouth. And I do not know if that was love or giving up on me, and I have decided it does not matter which. I told her the silence was not a way of handling it. It was a decision. I made it a couple 100,000 times, and everybody around me paid for it. Then I said the other thing. I said, I'm proud of you. I have never said that to a living person, not to her, not to her mother. She did not answer me. She reached over and took hold of my hand, and she has not done that since she was in her 20s, and we stood on that bench and watched the belt run. That is what my wife spent 30 years and $1.2 million buying. Not a company, not a pit. 4 minutes on a rock with my daughter where I said it out loud. I got home at dark. The house was quiet the way it has been quiet since 2021. I got my phone out and went down to the ends. Rhett Nash. Still in there. I looked at that name for a long time, and I thought about a 12-year-old at a window in a change house parking lot and $137 a month. Then I set the phone down on the table. Screen down. I am not ready. But I know that I am not ready, and I know why, and that is not the same as never having thought about it at all. The tape measure is still up on the bench above the north face. I have not gone and gotten it. Snow came over it in November. It will come out again in the spring rusted, and it will not be worth anything to anybody. I go up there some evenings when the shift is out. Belt quiet. Water past the trees going that color it goes about 8 o'clock. It sits there on the rock where I set it down. I leave it. For most of my life, I believed a thing the way you believe the floor will be there when you get out of bed. That saying nothing was a way of keeping your dignity, that a man who does the work does not have to explain the work, that if you are decent, people will figure it out on their own. I was 74 years old before I understood that silence is not a way of avoiding a decision. Silence is the decision, every single time. And the people around you do not take it for strength. They take it for a locked door, and they stand outside it and guess, and some of them guess wrong for 40 years. If there is somebody in your life you have been meaning to say something to, and you have been telling yourself they already know it, I would ask you to consider that they might not. The saddest part is never the losing. It is finding out how much of it never had to happen. I do not know what God intends by giving a man a good heart and a mouth that will not open. I have asked. I have sat in a kitchen at 2 in the morning and asked God why the thing that would have cost me nothing was the one thing I could not do. I do not have the answer. What I have is this. God gave me one more spring than I had any business expecting. I used 4 minutes of it to say something out loud, and 4 minutes was enough. It usually is. So let me ask you honestly, if the only way to save somebody you loved was to humiliate them in front of everyone they cared about, and they would not understand why until it was over, could you do it? Could you carry that alone? Or is there a line you would not cross, even to save them? Tell me in the comments. And if there is somebody you have gone years without saying it, to tell me about them too. I read them. It matters more than you know to an old man. If this story reached you tonight, hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss the next one. And go say it, whatever it is. Go say it while there is still somebody there to hear you.